There we go. Can people hear me at home? Or wherever you are?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, thank you very much. We'll call the meeting to order of the Forebay Subbasin Implementation Committee for October 28th, 2024. And I'd like to have someone call roll if they could, please. I'm not sure who's online or... Marita?
It's me. Thank you. Committee member Bramers,
Here. Here.
Ram,
Here.
Lord, McIntyre,
Here?
Moss,
Not here.
committee member Moss, present. Pansera,
Not here.
Rice,
Here.
Smith,
Here.
and Wood.
Not here.
You have a quorum.
Great, thank you, Marita. Committee member and staff introductions. I think most of us have, well, actually, we do have a new committee member. Dennis? You're not
I'm a guest.
Oh, you're a guest. Oh, I see.
He's a public person.
Ah, you are a public person. All right, very good, thank you. I thought maybe you had a new arrival. So everybody knows one another. I don't think introductions are warranted. We do need to appoint committee chair and vice chair. So anybody's willing to step into that position, I would certainly, well, I don't see anybody rushing to raise their hands.
I'm going to reserve mine for the upper.
Well, I'm willing to take it on and continue.
So moved.
But we do need a vice chair.
Well, you got your choice of several absentee.
Well, I'll note that Jerry is participating as an attendee. He wasn't able to be here in person. He was raising his hand. Oh.
Great, Jerry. And he was our vice chair last time, so if he's willing to continue, we have our slate.
I'll continue as vice chair.
Okay.
I move to approve the chair and vice chair.
We have a motion by Director Smith and a motion by Committee Member Smith and Committee Member Fromm made a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And now we need an appointment of a representative to the advisory committee.
And,
Jerry, I think. Jerry Lords.
yeah, and alternate.
I'm already on the advisory committee.
Perfect. So Jerry, would you be willing to serve as our, continue to serve as our representative from the Forebay Committee for the advisory committee?
If that's appropriate, yes.
Great, thank you, Jerry. And we need an alternate.
I'm already on, so.
That'd be great, Jason, since you're already on it.
Oh, good idea. Kill two birds with one stone. I don't know. So legal sounds good to me.
Unless we have someone else who wants to. No? Okay, great. So we need a motion to approve Jerry Lohr as our representative of the advisory committee and Jason Smith as the alternate.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by committee member Rice and a second by committee member Bramers. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda today?
None from staff.
Okay, great. Next, we have public comments. Are there any public comments at this time for matters not listed on the agenda for discussion?
We do. Not sure if Rita's going to weigh in, but
There we go.
we do have one member of the public with their hand raised, Tien Tran.
Hi, can folks hear me?
Yes.
Great. Here I'm Tien Tran with Community Water Center. I've met with staff several times, and I've joined the Salinas Valley GSA board and advisory committees meetings, but haven't been there in a while. So just wanted to reintroduce myself and share a little bit about Community Water Center's work in the Salinas Valley. We have a technical assistance project that we're trying to do more outreach for, and it's in the Greenfield Walnut Avenue area, so it's like borders both this GSA boundary and then also the Arroyo Seco boundary, but just hoping to see if residents are more interested in learning about Sigma and being more involved in the process, and just happy to answer any questions or, have conversations about Community Water Center's work and in the Forebay area, and, continue just to have that open line of communication. Thank you.
Any further public comment?
Another raised hands.
Thank you, Mariah. All right, we'll proceed to our second agenda item, presentations. We have Groundwater Quality Trend Network for Ag Order Preservation, Inc.
There it is. So we are happy to have representatives from Preservation, Inc. Joining us today. This is a continuation of a presentation they gave a few months ago introducing their groundwater quality trend monitoring network. As you all know, a portion of the Forebay and a portion of the Upper Valley are in the Phase 1 area. So Preservation, Inc. is developing an alternative compliance pathway, and the groundwater quality trend monitoring network. We've been collaborating really on the data side of things, really kind of diving into what records are out there, what well logs are available, both trying to, as you all know, for the water quality, sustainable management criteria goals, we really rely heavily on the data that Preservation, Inc. has collected over the years and irrigated lands compliance data information. So we're trying to stay tuned to the program as it develops and making sure that we're maximizing efficiency between the two, Sigma compliance as well as irrigated lands compliance. Sarah Lopez had a conflict, so wasn't able to join us today, but we have Dennis LeBeau and Pavan Diwali online who are going to be walking through the program. So are you going to kick it off? Or just turn your microphone on.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, this is Dennis LeBeau. I'm here on behalf of Preservation, Inc. I wanted to kind of key off the presentation a little bit and introduce Pavan. She's with Ludorf Scalmanini Consulting Engineers. They're working with Preservation, Inc. to identify candidate wells for this Phase 1 monitoring network. And I just wanted to share with you that I'll be the point of contact with Preservation, Inc. So any of these candidate wells, I don't know if anybody within this room will be owning or operating any of those wells, but I will be reaching out and confirming all the construction information and ownership and other attribute information on those wells. I think the key message I want to share at this point is, and touch a little bit on what Emily said, is we're looking to try to efficiently establish a network with the existing wells But I think one of the most important things is Preservation Inc. is going to try to control the messaging around this data. Right now, we're all sampling our wells for the Irrigated Lands Program, and it's being reported to the regional board. Not a lot of dialogue, not a lot of messaging and narrative going with that. It's just being collected, and they're interpreting it and deciding what to do going forward with their regulatory program. So I think I just want to emphasize that that's one of the benefits is that we will control the narrative on this data. This is a long-term trend monitoring network, and it's really designed to, as I just said, define trends of water quality over time in relation to this reduction of loading that's going to be occurring with the Irrigated Lands Program. So with that, I'll pass it back to Emily.
Pavan, are you ready to share your slides?
Yes, I am. Are you able to give me panelist access on the second instance of my attendance in the meeting?
I tried and it said it declined, but I'll do it again.
Thank you.
Please.
Actual constituents are you testing? Is it just nitrates or what is there?
Can you hear me? So obviously nitrates is one of the big ones. I honestly, off the top of my head, I'm not sure what all the constituents they are. I know they're going to do water levels in conjunction with water quality, and Pavan might be able to elaborate on that, but I don't know off the top of my head. John?
Yeah, so we're testing for nitrate and then just field parameters such as pH, dissolved oxygen, water temperature, and then water levels. It's we're going based off of what's been specified in the ag order. So those are the requirements from that. So before I start the presentation, I just want to caveat it with this is a preliminary work plan. So we have submitted this to the regional board. However, we are still waiting for finalization of the work plan that we submitted for the Santa Maria Phase 1 area. Based on when that gets finalized and any additional analysis that the regional board has us do for that work plan, that analysis will then also need to be incorporated into the Salinas Valley work plan. And we don't anticipate a lot of changes to the wells that I'm going to be showing you today, but there may be changes to the network. So that's just something to be aware of as we sort of walk through this presentation. So this slide sort of highlights the area that we focused on for the study area for this work plan. So it includes the Phase 1 area, which is outlined in orange, but then it also includes the entirety of the Forebay aquifer. We just did this because it was just that the GSA had a lot of good information in the GSP, so it was easy to incorporate that upper portion of the Forebay, which is a Phase 2 area in the ag order. And then the bottom of the Phase 1 area here extends into the Upper Valley aquifer. The total area that we are covering with this work plan is 191 square miles. So the ag order actually asks us to focus on agricultural areas. And the reason for that is that the regional board wants to evaluate management practices that are happening on the land surface, and then the impact of those management practices, such as fertilizer application or irrigation schedules, on the nitrate concentration that we're seeing in shallow or first encountered groundwater. So we took a look at the different types of crops that are being grown in the study area. The crop differences, so you can see here on this map, In green, that shows your truck crops, and then in purple are all the vineyards. Those are the primary crop types within our study area. However, we are not designing our network to reflect these differences in the cropping patterns because cropping patterns tend to change over time. And so if we were to base our network on those, we would constantly have to revise the network, anytime we saw a change in cropping pattern. So instead, we're just focusing on having our wells in these agricultural areas just to capture that impact that the regional board is looking for. We also took a look at water levels within this study area. The map on the left shows 7 wells where we looked at water levels, and all 7 wells had similar patterns where we saw that water levels have been stable over the long term. We recognize that this is due to recharge efforts and just reservoir releases and management of the subbasin itself. And we do see that although water levels have remained stable, they do show fluctuations during extended drought periods. Notably, you can see the 2015 extended drought period there with that dip in water levels. What looking at water levels tells us in the context of our GQTM network is that it helps us better refine the depth of our monitoring wells. We want to make sure that our wells are deep enough that if we are in an area where we are seeing large water level fluctuations, we don't want those wells to go dry over time. So Santa Maria was different in this case where we had seen water level fluctuations of up to 100 feet, which made our wells deeper in Santa Maria than they needed to be in the Salinas Valley, just because of these more stable water levels that we observe here. Another thing that we did do is we are using some of the wells that are a part of the Sigma groundwater level monitoring network. Because we're using some of those wells, we don't expect water levels to fluctuate as much in those wells, being that they have to abide by their MTs and MOs. So that also allowed us to have shallower wells in this area. So the target depth zone that we're looking at for these wells is based on the ag order as well. The regional board wants us to target first encountered or shallow groundwater. So our approach has been to look at shallow groundwater. We review the geology and hydrogeology that was presented in the GSP, along with all of the references that were cited in the GSP, and then any subsequent annual reports that have been published. And we saw that there is variability where the 180-foot and 400-foot aquifers are located and where they have that confining layer between them. We recognize that this is not the case in the Forebay aquifer or in the phase 1 area. In our report that we've shared with the GSA, we mentioned that we believe it's a basin fill situation that's happening in our study area. And so looking at all of this information along with the water level information and focusing on that shallow groundwater, the target depth for our monitoring wells was determined to be 200 feet below ground surface. We think that this depth will allow us to have wells that don't go dry over the long term, but are also able to capture those impacts from land surface applications into the groundwater. One thing I do want to mention is that in the Santa Maria phase 1 work plan, one of the additional analyses we are being asked to do by the regional board is to summarize the depth information of domestic wells. They believe that that's another line of evidence that we can use to support our target depth zone. That analysis has not been done for Salinas Valley yet, and so we will be conducting that to see what the mean depth of domestic wells is within our study area here. And so this target depth zone may change slightly based on what that analysis also shows us. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. So as I mentioned previously, that the area that we're targeting for monitoring is the agricultural area. So here now in green on this map on the right shows all of the ag areas within our study area. And this map shows all the different well sets that we analyzed in order to select our preliminary wells for the monitoring network. So we looked at GSP wells, those wells that are being monitored for Sigma already. We also looked at the Oscar database, which is just DWR's database of all the well completion reports that are available in this area. That database is helpful in the sense that they've summarized well depth information and other construction information for the wells along with well use type. However, the locations on those wells are not always accurate. Most of the time they are plotted to the center of a section. So that's sort of a limitation of that data set. We also looked at all the Preservation Inc. wells that are being sampled currently throughout the study area. A limitation of that data set is that those wells are often not associated with any construction information. So we don't know how deep those wells are. And the data that they have already collected can sometimes be a bit discontinuous because the well names don't always align with one another. So those are just some limitations that we've come across with that data. What we try to do is we try to incorporate or keep as many of the Preservation Inc. wells within the GQTM network as possible. That's always our first attempt. And so in order to do that, we map the Preservation Inc. wells along with the wells from the Oscar database and the GSP wells to see if we can find any wells that are plotting in the same location. If we do come across wells that plot in the same location, we go in and look at any owner information that we may have or any additional location information we may have that we can use to correlate a Preservation Inc. well with its well completion report from the DWR data set, or if we can correlate it with one of the GSP wells. So that's always our first selection criteria. And then to build out the rest of the network, because we aren't always as successful with those Preservation Inc. wells, then we go on to filter the Oscar data set and the GSP well data set for wells that are within our target depth zone. In this case, we had 34 total wells across these three data sets that were within our target depth zone that we could then choose our network wells from. Of those 34 wells, 19 total wells were selected. We tried to distribute these wells spatially so that we can cover the entire monitoring area. So all ag areas have coverage. We also try to have wells that are not clumped together too much. So, with those 34 wells, we may have had 3 wells that are relatively close to one another. And so we would only choose one of them. All of these 19 wells will be subjected to an annual monitoring frequency. This is also different than what we've proposed in Santa Maria, where we have 2 different monitoring frequencies. And that's just due to data availability. We had more wells in Santa Maria where we had long-term nitrate data than we did here. So we are, to start off, proposing sampling these wells annually. That frequency will be revisited in 5 to 10 years' time. At that point, we will have a lot more data collected, and we can see if it makes sense to change that monitoring frequency when we do that analysis at those timeframes. The well vetting, as Dennis talked about, will be conducted by Preservation Inc. So as he mentioned, he will be the contact person there. And the constituents that we're going to sample, as we discussed earlier, are dictated by the ag order. So we'll be sampling for nitrate and then several field parameters as well. And that was my last slide. Oh, I also wanted to mention in this map and in the work plan that's been presented to the regional board, the wells that are included here have not been mapped to their exact location. These wells are all offset by 1.11 kilometers. So they're within 1.11 kilometers of their actual location. We do that because we have not yet vet these wells, and we do not have access agreements in place to sample these wells. So we withhold accurate location information from the regional board until we have that in place.
Thank you very much for the report. Are there any questions from the committee members?
I have one.
Director Brennan?
Total of 19 wells. 14 are in the Forebay, 5 are in the Upper Valley. Why so few in the Upper Valley?
So we would have loved to have more wells in the Upper Valley. It was just the availability of wells within that target depth zone. We just didn't have additional wells that we could include.
And the rest of the Upper Valley Subbasin will be included in phase 2, correct?
Yes, yeah. And those work plans, we are due to submit those to the regional board at the end of August next year.
Well, because part of the Forebay here isn't even in phase 1, but you've represented those wells. So are you going to represent the Upper Valley later, or?
Yeah, so we just included the Forebay in this round because it's a smaller area, so it was easier just to add it into this phase. But the phase 2 work plans are not due until the end of August of 2025. And so the rest of the Upper Valley Aquifer, which falls under phase 2, the work plan for that will be generated next year and submitted then. I also wanted to mention to your, the original question about the density of wells within the Upper Valley Aquifer. As I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, we are going to do that domestic well analysis. And so if that ends up changing our depth zone, we may end up with more candidate wells, in which case we will absolutely try to fill some of these areas in the Upper Valley Aquifer.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Any other committee members with questions? And I would like to, for the record, state that at 1:10 p.m., Committee Member Woods was able to attend. Are there other questions? Oh, I didn't see you, Tim.
Raise my hand. This is a committee member from, at the Forebay Implementation Committee level, we look at the Forebay as some of the areas being influenced by the Salinas River and some of the areas being influenced by the Arroyo Seco River. And I wondered if Preservation Inc. has any interest, or is there a significance to the differentiation for the location of the wells, whether they're influenced by the Salinas versus the Arroyo Seco within the Forebay?
No, so we haven't differentiated the well placement based on which river would be influencing them. However, the rivers will come into play when we, as we delve deeper into the groundwater protection areas, which is a separate topic that's covered under the ag order. And so those areas, as we haven't really carved out an approach on how we're going to delineate the areas or the size of those areas, but they will eventually serve as an area over which we will be looking at nitrate applications, and then sort of looking at assimilative capacity and impact to the subsurface. And so areas generally closer to the river tend to have recharge from the rivers if there's a disconnection between the groundwater and the river. And so those areas, because of that subsurface recharge from the river tend to be better able to assimilate that nitrate. And so the rivers will come into play when we're looking at those groundwater protection areas.
Tim, is that satisfied?
Yeah, it's technical.
Okay, thank you.
Past me.
Thank you. Thank you for the question as well. Any other questions from committee members?
I've got one hand raised, member of the public. Go ahead, Tian.
Thanks, Emily. So really appreciate the presentation. I know you mentioned that you're going to be doing a domestic well analysis and recognizing that there's a lot of domestic wells that are shallower than 200 feet below ground level. And I was wondering what the timeline is for that analysis and how, I guess that will be, will there be a new date for setting the target depth?
Yeah, so we're working through that analysis for the Santa Maria Phase 1 area currently with the regional board. That was the first work plan to be submitted. So once we've come to an agreement on how that analysis is going to play into the selection of the depth zone, then we will, once that's been approved, then we'll apply that same analysis to the Salinas Valley. Currently, the completion date for the Santa Maria work plan is early 2025. However, we do expect to have consensus from the regional board on that depth zone analysis in the next month or so. And so once we've got that, we'll be able to apply it to Salinas Valley.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is, I know Salinas Valley is working on well registration and the CASGEM expansion for their monitoring networks. I'm wondering how those two initiatives are going to be integrated or potentially coordinated with this program.
So right now, we've used those 3 data sets that I had mentioned. So wells that are already being monitored for GSP purposes, wells that are included in the OSCAR database, and then the Preservation Inc. wells. I think that how we can incorporate that additional information will be talks that we'll need to have with the GSA on if we are able to access that information. One of the stipulations of wells within this network is that they have to have well completion reports or some sort of documentation that shows us the construction information. So top of screen, bottom of screen, and well depth information. So any well that we include has to have that. But we would definitely be open to incorporating additional data if it's available.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Is there any other additional public comment? Okay, thank you. Any last questions from the committee? Great. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate the update.
Thank you.
That takes us on to agenda item 3, business. We have the minutes of the committee July 2024 regular meeting. Were there any additions or deletions to those minutes as presented? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion second to approve. Director Bramer, or Committee Member Bramers, and was the motion, and Smith was the second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next agenda item is our Forebay Subbasin Implementation Committee 2025 schedule. And this is a recommendation to adopt this schedule. Do we have any conflicts at this time that anyone can state? Are we good? We'll go ahead and adopt it. All right. Need a motion and a second, please.
Second.
Okay, Committee Member Rice was the motion, and the second was Committee Member Smith. All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Is there any public comment on the last two agenda items?
No comments.
Great, thank you, everyone. And our next item is discussion regarding the request for Aquifer Properties test wells. Emily?
Sure, let's give it a quick introduction. This is part of our work stream on filling data gaps for the Forebay Subbasin, Aquifer Properties tests. Abby will explain the overview, but basically it helps us understand how the groundwater is moving through the aquifer. So it's a little bit of a tricky piece of information to collect that we are looking for well owner, landowner collaboration on. So with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Ostobar.
Hi. Are you seeing my screen?
We are.
Oh, good. Let me get the red square around it. Yeah, this will be a pretty quick agenda item. So we've started to assess the aquifer property information that we have. We have mostly North Valley information now and are kind of working our way southward. And so this is an area where we don't have any aquifer tests. And that really gives us good information about how quickly the water moves through the aquifer and storage values, which then we can use to change groundwater levels into groundwater storage change. And this is an area that we've identified that we don't anticipate getting any additional information beyond what we've already looked for, and yet do want some aquifer property information. And that'll be helpful for calibrating the models and then really understanding how the system works. And so we'd like to target the depth of 200 to 700 feet. So this is below what was just presented for the GQTM monitoring network. One of the tricky things in this area is that we don't have a lot of the screen interval depth information. So there's a lot of wells, but we don't necessarily know where they're screened. And so what we're looking for is, within that depth to have a well that we can pump. So, well that can be pumped, and then to have a couple, ideally at least 2 wells nearby that can be monitored. And by monitored, we'll need to be able to have the sounding port where we can basically put the transducer into it without disrupting the pump itself. So we're kind of looking for that pairing within this depth in this area. And as Emily mentioned, being able to get well owner permission to do this. It typically is about a 3-day process. We have the well shut off one day, let the groundwater levels stabilize. They pump it for at least 8 hours, monitoring the groundwater levels of the monitoring wells and that well. And then there's takedown the following day. So we tend to like to run these in the winter if possible. There can be complications with precipitation, but generally that's when growers are okay shutting off the well for a couple days. And so that's kind of what we're targeting to do this winter with the grant funds. So we're hoping if any of you know or have people that you know or neighbors or anybody in this area who knows the depth of their wells, we'd love input. And it's definitely a lot easier, for if somebody's familiar with the GSA or has somebody who is familiar talking to them than just us cold calling or Emily cold calling growers in this area.
Thank you, Abby. I have several wells that could be of help in that area. So if you don't mind emailing me, I can get you the well driller's logs.
Well, great. Yes.
Anybody else want to volunteer?
Yeah, same.
Yeah, Jason Smith has a number of wells.
I like your idea. I said reach out to Abby and Emily, but reach out to me. That's better, right?
Anyone else?
Yes, you do. You have Tom Bursick.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. Is there any public comment on this?
You do.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Abby. We appreciate the request.
Sorry, Really quick, have you reached out to CAF and or the UC Ag Extension? Because they might have connection to small farmers in the area that could be part of this monitoring network.
I'm sorry, reach out to who?
So CAF is the Community Alliance for Family Farms, and then there's the UC Ag Extension. I can send this information to Emily.
Sure, that sounds like a good idea. Thank you. Okay, any other public comment on this agenda item?
You do, you have Tom Versick.
Mr. Versick, please go ahead. Tom, can you hear us? Please go ahead. We'll come back to you, Mr. Versick.
Thank you. This is Tom Versick, and I did not think I had my hand up, so I don't need to say anything at this point. Thank you.
Great, Mr. Versick, thank you. All right, without seeing any other public comment on this matter, we'll go to our next agenda item. And this is the informational item, well registration and GEMS expansion update. Emily?
So I'll just give this a quick introduction and then pass it over to Amy Woodrow with the Monterey County Water Resource Agency, who's on Zoom. The Monterey County Board of Supervisors approved a new groundwater monitoring program, GMP, for another acronym, like we all need. But it really expands on several of the existing programs that are run by the Monterey County Water Resource Agency, and ultimately helps bring the current programs and change them slightly to help meet SGMA reporting requirements. So the biggest immediate change is going to be around timelines of reporting. As you all know, we've been reporting the extraction data 1 year delayed in our annual reports, which is a bit clunky. So this is both Water Resource Agency and the GSA collaborating on how to make those timelines work so that the annual reports reflect the previous water year's extraction data. So with that, I'll pass it over to Amy Woodrow.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Amy Woodrow, I'm a senior hydrologist at the Water Resources Agency. Thank you for the introduction, Emily. And I have a few slides to share with you today. I'm just going to walk through a little bit of the new ordinance that Emily just mentioned, and sort of what some of these changes are and what they'll look like as we go forward with implementation of this new ordinance. So, as Emily mentioned, on October 1st, a new ordinance was adopted by the agency's Board of Supervisors, and there's a bit of language in the ordinance, but at a really high level, the ordinance repealed some existing, actually 3 ordinances that the agency had that were related to the groundwater extraction reporting program. The new ordinance covers, in addition to groundwater extraction, well registration and groundwater level and quality monitoring. So all lumped together, those are what we're now referring to as the groundwater monitoring program, or that GMP that Emily mentioned. And the new ordinance also provides for a collection of a regulatory fee, which is something that was not in the prior ordinances. And in addition to adopting this new ordinance, at the same time, a resolution was approved that is going to implement what the agency is referring to as the Groundwater Monitoring Program Manual. And the concept behind having these 2 documents was that the ordinance is intentionally kind of high level, broad, speaking largely at the program level and different authorities that the agency has. And the manual is intended to get into kind of all of the details of how the ordinance will be implemented, data needs, timelines, the types of things that might change based on either Water Resources Agency or GSA needs in the future. And the idea is that the manual will provide us a mechanism for, on an annual basis, evaluating data needs and an easier way to make changes to the program as opposed to amending or redoing an ordinance, which is a bit of a cumbersome process. So again, this groundwater monitoring program has these 4 components. Today, I'm going to touch mostly on the well registration and the extraction reporting parts, because those are kind of things that have more critical timelines and have more changes in them. So geographically, what we're going to be looking at when we talk about the groundwater monitoring program is focused on either the Water Resources Agency Zone 2C, which is something a lot of you are probably familiar with, and the boundaries of the 6 subbasins listed there, which are ones that the Salinas Valley Basin GSA is involved with. So the map that you see on the right there is essentially a kind of a compilation of all of those zones. So that's the area where some of these different programs will be applied to as we go forward. I'll start first with the well registration. There were fewer changes with this. The agency has historically had a well registration requirement for wells that were reporting groundwater pumping. That requirement now is expanded, so it covers that entire geographic area that was shown on the prior map. So any well within that geographic area now must be registered with the Water Resources Agency. We are working on developing an online portal to allow people to do that. In the meantime, we do have a form available online. This is the same mechanism we've used in the past for doing well registration. And, in the very near term, it will be reaching out to people if there are new wells being constructed, if there are, wells that we become aware of that need to be registered. There will be kind of that trigger by the agency reaching out either by email, by postal mail, both mechanisms perhaps, saying, hey, we have this information. We think you have the new well. Can you give us, these details on it? So that's, in the near term, we're kind of, this is all being phased in, but we will eventually get to the point where we have a more interactive online portal, but this is what we have for right now. On the groundwater extraction reporting program side of things, the extraction reporting is now going to be required in that same, geographic area for all wells that extract more than 2 acre-feet per year. And the extraction data will continue to be reported through the agency's groundwater extraction management system, or GEMS, which is, I think how a lot of us have referred to that program in the past. So it will be the same online interface that we've used. So anybody who has been reporting groundwater extraction data will continue to do it in the same way. There are approved methods for measuring groundwater extraction, the details of which are described in that GMP manual. Again, for the most part, it remains unchanged. There are either a flow meter, electrical meter, an hour meter, and then there is also some language in the new GMP manual such that people who are reporting extraction data, for example, to the state board with an approved method, that they won't have to do something different for reporting data to the Water Resources Agency. Like, you can continue using the same method and submit that data. So we won't be, we're trying to avoid, requiring people to do 2 different things for 2 different agencies. And we'll be rolling out these new requirements in kind of a phased way, because it does have the potential to affect a lot of people. In the very near term, some people who have historically reported groundwater extraction data to the agency will be required to report data for 2024 as they have been in the past. So it's, any well owners or operators who are already doing that with the agency, those are the people we'll be looking to, to start reporting data here in the very near term within the next couple of weeks. There are another subset of well owners and operators who will need to start collecting data this year so that they're ready to report next fall. And those will be any non-de minimis wells that are either agricultural, industrial, municipal, or domestic wells that have 15 or more connections. So those, anyone who's already collecting data will continue to do so. And then the expansion will spread out in these new geographic areas to that, that subset of wells. And those people will need to start collecting data, starting here in the next few months. And then we'll be reaching out in 2025 to smaller domestic wells, so wells that have between 5 and 14 connections. And the reason we're doing it in this phased way is there's a recognition that, not all of those wells may have meters. This is going to be a newer program and a newer concept to those folks. So we want to, take the time to do the outreach and share the information and not just spring things on people. So we're trying to, start things with people who are already familiar with the program and roll it out slowly. In terms of timelines, reporting data, for water that was used in 2024 will be kind of a transitional year in terms of the deadlines and time frame. And in part, this is because of the timing of the ordinance. The ordinance was adopted on October 1st. It's effective as of November 1st, which meant that, we needed to start collecting the reporting data after that. So whilst, if you picked up the GMP manual today, you'd read it and say, it says, all data has to be submitted by November 1st. That's obviously not practical given, where we are on the calendar. So we are adopting kind of an interim transitional schedule for this year. So we will be asking people to submit data for the water year. So for water year 2024, which is new, but they will be doing it on a slightly different timeline that I'm going to get into here in just a minute. So what we're asking for this year is that well owners and operators who have to submit data for 2024, so that's again, anybody who historically reported extractions to the Water Resources Agency, will do so by January 10th. So we're going to be reaching out starting tomorrow with kind of a soft opening of the GEMS portal where we have a 2-week period that allows people to make administrative changes to their wells. So for example, if you aren't farming a particular ranch this year, you can contact us and say, those aren't my wells, they weren't my wells in 2024, or hey, I picked up these new wells in 2024. Like those kinds of changes, we always have a 2-week period for doing that well information verification. So we'll be sending out email notifications starting tomorrow, as well as letters. So everybody will get a list. Anybody who's required to report, who has been reporting in the past, will get that list from the agency of, these are the wells that will be looking for data from you this year. And we have this 2-week period to interact and make changes. And then starting on November 12th, we'll be opening up the GEMS portal for groundwater extraction data submittal. And we'll be looking for people to submit data from October 2023 to September 2024. If you recall, the agency historically had a different reporting. We called it a reporting year, and it went from November 1st. That was the start of the reporting year through October. So we're shifting that so that it aligns with the water year, which is more consistent with the regulatory needs of the GSA and the reports, the annual reports that are done. And then we will be, closing the GEMS portal for water year 2024 data on January 10th. So this is it's a different, time window. The agency has historically had the reporting period be much longer. but we are trying to, we need to condense that to meet the regulatory needs of the SVB GSA. We have it a little bit of a longer time period this year just to try to, ease the transition a little bit, but and with also recognizing that a lot of this overlaps with holiday seasons. So that can be complicated. I know lots of people are out of the office and it's challenging. So we're, recognizing there may be lots of questions, need for help on this as we get used to these different timelines. But, we're trying to get the word out here to let people know what the time frame looks like for this year. So looking ahead, we'll get all of the data for 2024. As I mentioned earlier, people who are new to GEMS in the expansion area, will be reaching out to them so they know that they need to start collecting data. And then in the future, the water year data will be reported during the month of October with a November 1st deadline. So there will be a 30-day period to report extraction data in future years. And that's all described in that groundwater monitoring program manual. I know there was a lot of text, a lot of dates flying around, trying to capture it here all in one place. We have showing that well information verification period that's starting tomorrow. The reporting for water year 2024 occurring November through January. And then people will begin collecting their water year 2025 data. And then at the end, in October of 2025, we'll be looking for that reporting of data from 2025. And I know I covered a lot of information here, but I just wanted to, let everybody know the ordinance, the manual, an information page with FAQs. Those things are all available on either or the agency's website or the GSA website. Agency staff's also available. We have a dedicated email for extraction, GEMS questions, and always happy to talk to people over the phone too. You're welcome to call and ask for the hydrology staff. And we recognize there's a lot of new things, different timelines. We want to try to make this as easy as possible. But I'll end with that, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions for Amy?
Just quick, what did we used to be? We were March. When was our old GEMS data or our water extraction reports?
Yeah, they used to be due February 15th. So we used to open the portal in November, like a week or so before Thanksgiving, and have it open until February 15th.
So I want to make a comment, being on the Water Resources Board, and as this has come up and why this is all happening, which Amy mentioned briefly, but part of the issue the main issue is that they need the data sooner than what we usually. So we were February. I mean, we weren't even seeing it, collected and compiled until June or July. So what happened last year is we actually, because we had the data, we released it before we even saw it. So this has been the work through that's come together and why we're working on these new collection dates to kind of do that. That's one. And then two, and I know I mentioned this before, one that I don't think any other county in the state has this that we've been doing for however many years, 30 years, but two, the collaboration between the Water Resources Agency and the groundwater basin to not, recreate the wheel and have a duplicative process and cost more money. So it's been a little cumbersome and whatever, but since we are all paying the same to these two agencies, the more collaboration and work that we can do together and not do that is appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Any other questions for Amy? Amy, I have, and by the way, thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. In the Langley and the Monterey in particular, will notices go out to all the property owners, regardless of whether they're registered currently or have a health department permit to operate a water system?
So yeah, that's a great question, and this is where kind of the well registration effort that the agency's been doing, kind of the desktop exercise that you may have, I think we've talked about in the past. So over the last year, agency staff has been making an effort to identify wells, match them with permits, match them with completion reports, so that we, know who to contact, right? Who we think will need to start collecting data. So those people will be notified. Any wells that we've been able to identify and locate will be sending information out to people, whether it's, we think you have a well, can you register it, please? Or if it applies that they would be required to report extraction data, we'd be sharing information with them about that as well. Yeah, so that would apply, throughout the Langley, the Monterey, anything, what we're trying to do in the near term is reach out to those, 15 and over, the wells that serve 15 plus connections. In the following year, we'll be reaching out to the smaller water systems. And in the meantime, we'll be continuing the effort both to identify wells, but also doing outreach in partnership with the GSA to share information with people about, what are these programs? Why are we going to be asking you for this? What do we use it for? So that they don't just, so that their interaction with us doesn't start with us coming and asking for data that they, don't know why we're asking for it.
Yeah, great, thank you. And one last question. So I'm in the Monterey, I live there, and I know that there are a number of wells that will probably be considered de minimis, but that residents don't actually know whether they are using 2 acre-feet of water a year or not. And I know that for certain in the little subdivision that I'm in, because it's 2,000 gallons a day, which is a lot of water. But if you got a horse ranch and a lot of animals, all that, it really adds up fast, landscaping, what have you. So I guess in the future, and there are a lot of de minimis well users, have we given any thought to how we might approach that use in the future, especially once we get to the point where we've got to, look at demand management?
Yes, those are, we've gotten a lot of great questions and comments along those lines, and we are still working with the GSA staff trying to figure out, what we can do to make sure we're getting as much data as possible, being reasonable with what we're asking of people, and also, I hear the question about, if you're not measuring it, how do you know if you're de minimis or not? So trying to figure out what that looks like. I don't have an answer exactly of what the path forward will be for that, but we are absolutely aware that it's something that we need to figure out.
Yeah, it wasn't really a fair question to you because I understand you're all working through that. I just think it's a comment. And as a potential solution, I think some town hall meetings, like in particular in Monterey at the country club there, to try and get residents to come forward and learn more about this because it's a tough situation out there. But thank you for your efforts.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. John, go ahead, please.
Amy, so like Steve mentioned out there in the corral area, the GSA area doesn't encompass the whole corral. So this will include that part of corral also, right? That's outside the GSA?
Good point.
Outside the SVB GSA area?
Correct. Yeah. That subbasin does not include all corral or San Bernardino.
Right. That's a good question. I don't have an answer for that for you today. The way the new ordinance is written is that the agency has the authority to request this data anywhere within its jurisdiction, which is the entire county. But we are doing it either for agency needs or in response to a requesting agency like the GSA, the SVB GSA, coming to us and saying, we would like data in this particular area. So I don't have an answer for that right now, but I am aware of that, that there are two different, differently managed areas there.
And right now, the GSA is asking just for data in our jurisdiction for that, I think the area you're talking about in the Corral, San Venancio area. So I know it's the jurisdictional line is drawn kind of through neighborhoods, which I think is what you're referencing there. But yeah, we are only asking for the data that's within our jurisdiction.
And then the second part, are there any consequences to one not registering and then two not reporting?
There are, yes, there's enforcement language in the ordinance that includes fines. But I will say, our intent, especially with this being a new thing, is we're not looking to come out of the gate with the enforcement angle. I'd much rather work on reaching out to people, sharing information, trying to, meet those requirements. The agency has historically had a very high percentage of required people reporting. Typically it's in the 96% of people who are required to report do so. We'd love to, be able to maintain that high level of compliance without engaging in a lot of enforcement, but that is in the ordinance as an option at the discretion of the general manager.
A question is there an exception for riparian wells, or how do you handle those?
There is not an exception for riparian wells. Can you clarify what you're thinking?
My understanding is some of the diverters report diversion and use at the state board. That's a riparian diversion and use as opposed to a groundwater extraction. And I wonder if there's a differentiation there. And do they have to register riparian wells?
There is not an exception for it. We have historically had people report data both as a riparian diversion to the state board and also as a groundwater extraction to the agency for the same well. We are, one of the data fields we're asking for going forward is just, a yes or no, like is this also being reported, to avoid or trying to address some of those questions about double counting of diversions and groundwater extractions going forward. But there is not an exception in the ordinance for, if something, the ordinance defines what a well is, and then if something meets that definition, it would fall within the, registration and extraction reporting requirements.
Thank you, Amy. I'll take it out for public comment at this time.
No public comment.
Nancy Isaacson has her hand raised. Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, there, I'm unmuted. Thank you. Nancy Isaacson, Salinas Valley Water Coalition. I just wanted to ask for a copy of the slide presentation and wondering when it would be. I'm assuming it will be available on the website and posted there. So thank you. But it was a good presentation and I appreciate the work, Amy.
Thank you, Nancy. I'll make sure Emily gets a copy of the slides so they can be shared.
Thank you.
Any further public comment?
No other raised hands.
Thank you, Merida. Well, thanks again, Amy. And,
yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the time.
You bet, we appreciate that. Next up, we have the staff reports. First one is an update on the Arroyo Seco Cone Management Area Domestic Water Quality Investigation. I'm going to assume that is Mr. Weeks.
Yeah, this time I don't have to pass the microphone quite as far. Just a brief report. Gus Yates and his team have been engaged in developing data, gathering data. It's a desktop analysis. So I don't have much to share yet. I haven't seen any draft information, but they are working on it. I know Emily did meet with Gus, and they were talking water quality, so you may have some additional input, or not.
I just, we looped Gus into the conversations that we've been having with Preservation Inc. and Montgomery Associates and Water Resource Agency, again, to try to reduce any redundancy and make sure that we're sort of building on all of the efforts to really understand where there's domestic wells, and for this specific work stream in the Arroyo Seco Cone Management Area, understanding the rural water quality challenges better. And so
it is a bit of a challenge. Number one, locating them. Number two, trying to get their arms around what data does or does not exist. So it's in process, and as soon as we get something that's legible and has been reviewed, we'll get it out to the public.
Great, thank you. Any questions on that agenda item? Public comment on that agenda item? Not seeing any, we'll go on to 6.2, the SMC TAC update.
There we go. Okay, so this is just a brief update on the Sustainable Management Criteria Technical Advisory Committee, aka SMC TAC. They convened for the second time. Oops, here we go. They convened for the first time in April, second time in August, and then they have their next meeting scheduled for November 20th. Their regular meeting schedule is going to be annually in April to review the annual reports, but as they're doing a lot of the work that's been assigned to them upon convening them, they're having a lot of special meetings as they're diving into the data and then sort of their task at hand. So they've talked about their role, their goals, their guiding principles, how they're going to work together. They received presentations about the Forebay Aquifer and the Upper Valley Aquifer, both their sustainable management criteria, current conditions, and then the hydrogeologic models as they've been updated. So they've been getting all of that really technical information. They've talked about sort of what additional data that they would need. And then also we have a data sharing platform that's available through the GSA website. It's when you go to the web map, there's now another folder where it's where you can access SMC TAC data, and as they're sharing data and we're providing additional data as requested. We've also been talking with them about the action levels. So this is the kind of groundwater conditions that would cause the need for projects and management actions to get started. We used to refer to them as triggers. I think action levels is more appropriate. And starting with groundwater elevations, kind of flagging the need to address water quality as well as interconnected surface water in the future. So I attached the notes from their April 10th meeting at your prior Subbasin Committee meeting. I attached the notes from their August meeting on this one, just trying to make sure you guys are coming along as they're making progress. I'm not going to dive into all of their guiding principles, but I guess just wanted to flag that they are, committed to having a thoughtful and distinct process for each subbasin. So really thinking about the Forebay and the Upper Valley as unique subbasins, which was requested by the subbasin committees to base, their decisions and recommendations based on data and science, and then to ultimately try to find a consensus within the SMC TAC. But if there, are unique opinions, we're going to share those opinions with the subbasin committees so that you all have all of the information to then formulate your opinion to then pass along to the boards. I think I covered that in that slide. And then action levels. We have been talking about the action levels as far as short term and then long term. So short term, the definition attached to that are excessive declines during successive years without conservation releases. And then the question that the SMC TAC is trying to address is, how are those groundwater conditions defined, and then what occurs when the action level is met? Is that when planning starts, or is that when action starts? And so thinking through that action. The long-term groundwater elevation action level, so this is excessive declines over multiple years, so a longer time frame without any conservation releases. This is a longer-term drought. what kind of data and analysis are needed to compare kind of those future annual conditions. So, so thinking through, okay, so what does this hypothetical drought look like? What kind of groundwater conditions would then trigger an action level? what kind of action level would occur in the context of those long-term groundwater elevation trends? And so we documented some of their initial ideas in the notes attached to the agenda, but they're very much under development, draft form, and just wanted to, again, provide a brief update on those. That's my last slide.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Any questions for Emily? Committee member Fromm.
Emily, is the TAC communicating with the water agency about the development of their reservoir release HCP, and does that figure into their calculations on approaches?
So the TAC did receive a presentation about the drought TAC. So the SMC TAC received a presentation about the Water Resource Agency's drought TAC, which is responsible for making, release recommendations during times of drought, because there's an idea that those need to be connected and informed. The HCP conversation, I think the TAC hasn't talked about the HCP in particular. There are some overlapping members, so they are informed about it. Because the HCP has a TAC as well. I do have an update on the HCP that we can get into, but the HCP TAC and some of their conversations that they're having about reservoir operations, they are planning a public meeting, and as well as bringing information to the board at the early 2025. So I think the timelines are coinciding at the same time, and I think when in early 2025, when they have an update, there might be an opportunity to make sure that everybody's informed.
Okay. Thanks. Any further questions from the committee? Take it out to the public. Any public questions on this agenda item?
No raised hands.
Thank you, Marita.
Christopher Bunn has his hand raised.
Chris, go ahead, please.
Marita, can you unmute him?
I did.
Thank you. Emily, in the drought tax discussions, how are they distinguishing between riparian pumping versus groundwater pumping? And then as a subset of that, how are they distinguishing, or are they distinguishing between riparian and underflow pumping? Thanks.
So right now, kind of similar to Amy's answer, the extraction data is all reported as groundwater extraction data. And then, we are attempting to not double count the data that's also reported as surface water. But within the data, we are not pulling out water that's being pumped under the ground that could fall under a riparian right, and water that would not fall under a riparian right. So that data is not distinguished, if that answers your question.
Partially, and I'll just one follow-up, and then I'll hop off. Do you have plans to, down the road, distinguish between those subsets?
It comes down to I think a water right determination, which we don't intend to try to determine what is a surface right and what is groundwater being pumped.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any other public comment?
No other public comment.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 6.3, update on Salinas Valley hydrologic models.
So I added a slide to really help me, because this is still in a very technical phase of the work. The Flow West is the consultant who's doing the hydrologic model using a tool referred to as HEC-RAS to try to answer the question that we've posed, which is, okay, through the current Salinas River Maintenance Program, where there's Remundo being removed and sediment being managed, either under the current program, the current work that's being done, or under, let's say, maximizing the current permit. If all that work is done, what's the groundwater benefit? If there's additional floodplain for the river to access in low flow events, is there additional recharge occurring? And it's really getting at a question that a large portion of the state's trying to answer about this surface water groundwater interaction, which is a really complicated question to model. So a lot of the conversations lately have just been between modelers to modelers, and they're trying to sort out like how to do it, because really there isn't a perfect tool to use. It's using a tool that's meant for surface water modeling and a tool that's meant for groundwater modeling, and then trying to get them to communicate. And so the latest progress, in sort of summary, is that the Flow West has really updated the HEC-RAS model to the 2023 topography, the 2024 hydrology, and then has been validating it according to the 2023 events and against gauge records from the Chular, Soledad, and Spreckles gauges to then look at the channel capacity. So when we look at the channel capacity, that's when we can start to visualize the stage, or how high the water is going to be in the channel, which then informs kind of how much pressure, how much recharge potential there might be along the Salinas River. Then he's been running kind of a sample of outputs that they Flow West then shared with M&A to try to connect the dots between the surface water models and the groundwater models. Super in the weeds. We're going to get back to you. I wanted to bring you an update, but it is quite technical at this point.
Great, thank you. Questions for Emily? Public comment on this matter?
No other raised hands.
Great, thank you. Thank you again, Emily, for the update. 6.4, Forebay Subbasin Work Plan for water year 2024, status update, June 2024.
And I did have one other just staff report update that I should have mentioned at the beginning. It was in response to a request for Habitat Conservation Plan update. Should I do that now? Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
All right. So there has been requests to receive more information from the Water Resource Agency about the process that's going on with their Habitat Conservation Plan. The long and the short of it is that there will be stakeholder meetings coming out in early 2025, like I mentioned. They've been working through the modeling with both the the federal regulatory agencies, as well as through the HCP Technical Advisory Committee. And then once they have an update, they're going to be bringing it to their board, as well as having a stakeholder meeting to talk about that modeling. They do have a website dedicated to Habitat Conservation Plan sort of updates. It's that SalinasRiverManagementProgram.org. And within there, in the HCP meetings, they do have links with presentations with schedules, like multi-year schedules. So it's a ton of information, but if you're interested in the HCP, this is definitely where to go. And we will definitely make sure you're informed early 2025 when the stakeholder meetings happen.
Thank you.
I know we asked to have it on the agenda next Water Resources Agency, just for, you probably get more an update now.
Oh.
I know Water Resources is going to give an up-to-date in November, so.
And Perrette has her hand raised.
Correct?
Is that okay?
Please, I'm sorry.
My turn?
Yes, please.
I also wanted to add one to the staff reports. Curtis, I thought maybe we want to share that we're working on the Arroyo Seco GSA and Salinas Valley Basin GSA coordination agreement with hopes and with a goal to make it a little more streamlined and clear. I understand when it was first adopted, there were reasons that there was a lot of detail in that agreement that is maybe not relevant or appropriate anymore. So That is, we've gone through an outline, also from SVB GSA standpoint. One of the things I would like to see is we have two GSAs, two partner GSAs, Marina Coast Water District and Arroyo Seco. And we have two agreements that there's nothing similar between the two of them, that I'd like to see, at least structurally, a little better alignment of those two partnerships, but not necessarily in content. They are two very different regions, and there are unique circumstances for each of them. So we're not thinking about making them carbon copy of each other, but at least how they're structured. Is it recitals first, or is it some other background section, and where the parties are and the effective dates, and just some of the very basic administrative and governance. But Curtis, anything to add to that from your, I know you're now in the weeds, so reading through it.
Yeah, just a couple thoughts. First off, the agreement is actually an implementation agreement. I just,
Another reason, implementation, and the other one is framework agreement we have.
As Fred indicated, we are trying to streamline it. There's an awful lot of administrative elements that were wrapped into the original agreement that aren't really working. Frankly, we're not adhering to them, so we need to change it. And it was written at a time when the two organizations were still figuring out how we were going to work together. So, so those pieces are pretty easy. So most of the low-hanging fruit we've already kind of worked through, and now we're into kind of the meat of that agreement, working through some of those details, and it's going to take us a while.
And it will go to our coordination committee. It's an implementation agreement, but we have coordination committee, right? Yeah. So it will go to the coordination committee when we have a draft to share, and then obviously to the boards of both GSAs. And I don't know, the schedule-wise, love to bring it to this committee for review and input as well.
Great. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. Emily, you still have the Forebay Subbasin work plan?
Sure, and that is way too much to talk through. It is our little spreadsheet to keep you all informed. Because of our meeting schedule, it's a little out of date by now, but we're about to come out with the Q1 update for this year, and just to keep you guys posted.
Thank you. Any questions for Emily or for Curtis on this? Great, we'll take it out to the public. Any public comment at this time?
No public comment.
Okay, seeing none, we'll go on to 7, committee member reports. Anybody? Any committee members have a report? Seeing none, we'll go on to number 8, future items. We have the City of Soledad's Recycled Water Conveyance Project update in the future. We have the annual report narrative and the progress toward implementation sustainability strategy, and we finally have an annual report narrative on conditions. So those are all things that we'll have in the future agenda. Any additions to that? Tim, Mr. Fromm.
Not necessarily an addition, but regarding the City of Soledad Recycle Water Program, it was brought to us half a dozen months ago or so. And it's always been kind of pending. In the future, we'll get an update. I hope we get an update before they have a finalized plan, so if there's some reason to have input from this implementation committee, we can make it.
Request?
He emailed me, and we decided that January would be a good time, but let me see what he said. He says he doesn't have any updates on the project other than it going from a 30% to 90% design.
That's quite a significant jump. I'd say that that's a project which is darn near finalized. If it gets down to 90%, you may be losing your opportunity to chime in.
Yeah, he said that that they thought it would be good to have an update in January when they have the project out for bids. So that's like when they.
Thanks.
Perhaps we could request the significance of the project might suggest that we could get an update sooner, maybe? Just at our next meeting? When is our next meeting? Oh. Well, perhaps an update at our next board meeting, in a staff report, maybe? Just to see where they're at.
So let me ask a question. Tim, are you concerned about the physical elements or their operation or both?
My recollection was the way it was proposed to us, it potentially had some impact on the sustainability of the groundwater in that area, because water was no longer going to percolate back into the system. It was going to be potentially exported out of the basin. And yeah, remember when they came and talked to us, they thought they may have a purchaser for the recycled water, which would be out of basin. And if that was the case, I was hoping to have that conversation about, is there some mitigation for the amount of water which may be exported, which is no longer perking into the groundwater basin?
That's a good kind of general thought. It sounds like to me, relative to my question, that's kind of an operational issue, where it's what are they going to do with the water where it's going. Of course, having infrastructure sprayed out all over the place, no pun intended, to be able to move water around is a key element. It would be helpful to make sure that the water that they're going to be treating and disposing of provides, well, long-term benefit to the groundwater base.
At least no net loss.
Yeah, roger that.
Okay, good thinking. All right, any other future items for our agenda? Any public comment on this matter?
No comments online.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your time this afternoon, and we'll adjourn the meeting.
Hooray!